Please take your seats. We'll get started. You can sit there. Oh, I see. Come on in. So thank you to everybody for joining us this morning. This is our fourth annual speakership from the Tobacco Center of Regulatory Science on youth and young adults. And very excited this morning to introduce one of our colleagues from Yale, Dr. Suchitra Krishnan-Sarin. So Dr. Krishnan Sarn is a professor of psychiatry at Yale University School of Medicine. She received her PhD in pharmacology and toxicology from Purdue University in Indiana. And then from Indiana, she went to Yale University School of Medicine, first as a postdoctoral fellow in 1994, and then after that, she was a faculty member since 1996. So her research is focused on developing biobehavioral understanding of substance use behaviors in adult and adolescent substance users with the goal of developing optimal prevention and cessation intervention. And those of you who were able to join her webinar yesterday, I think she began to talk about the complexities of the overlay between tobacco use, e-cigarette use, new and emerging products, and other substances used by adolescents. In the area of adolescent tobacco use, she's conducted qualitative research, including focus groups and surveys to understand patterns and perceptions of use of tobacco products. She's done clinical trials to develop and test novel behavioral and pharmacological cessation and prevention interventions, and experimental evaluations of behavioral and neural predictors of use and cessation behaviors. Because of her expertise in youth tobacco use, she contributed to the last Surgeon General's report on youth and young adults, and was a member of FDA's Tobacco Product Science Advisory Committee. So Dr. Krishnan Sarn is co-PI of one of our sister TCORS. So we have, of the 14 TCORS, there's a few sister institutions and then a lot of brother institutions. So representative of the field, but she is one of our sister TCORS, the Yale Tobacco Center of Regulatory Science, and it's using a multidisciplinary approach to understand the role of flavors in tobacco and nicotine addiction. And today, we're looking very forward to her address for our TCORS on youth and e-cigarettes, why are we concerned? So please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Krishnan Sarn as our fourth annual TCORS Distinguished Speaker.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that very nice introduction. I have been working in the area of substance use behaviors in adults and youth for a very long time. It has been a very interesting journey. We have been involved in all kinds of work, as Cheryl described. We are mainly interventionists. That's how we came into this area of tobacco regulation, and it's been a very interesting experience trying to understand and realize that the work that you're doing is going to have an immediate impact and is very important for regulations as going forward. And it's not just going to be in a scientific paper hidden somewhere in the literature that you hope somebody will read at some point of time and do something with. So I think that is what has been my most exciting exposure over the past few years. That's what I have learned from this whole regulatory field that we are involved in today. So That said, as my title indicates, I'm going to tell you a little bit about e-cigarettes. And I'm sure most of you have heard about electronic cigarettes or e-cigarettes. They are also called electronic nicotine delivery systems. They look somewhat like this, as you can see here, but there are a number of different forms available on the market. They started out as products that pretty much mimicked a cigarette, where they contained an entire amount of nicotine in an entire pack of cigarettes in one e-cigarette. However, they have now morphed into all kinds of different technology where you have mods, which are modifiable products that can be modified for all kinds of different behaviors. And I'll try and walk you through some of these things today. Before I get in, of course, I have to give you the usual disclaimer slide that we all have to present. The work I'll be talking about today was funded through a NIDA grant, and the funding agencies have no role in the design, collection, analysis, or interpretation of the data. And as Cheryl already mentioned, I was a member of the FDA Tobacco Product Scientific Advisory Committee, and I'm a principal investigator of the NIDA-funded Tobacco Center at Yale. So, jumping right into this, I want to kind of set the stage for you for why this is an important issue to examine. Tobacco use, specifically cigarette smoking, is still the leading cause of preventable disease and death in the United States. Between 1964 and 2014, over 20 million Americans died because of smoking-related illnesses, and this included a lot of people who were non-smokers and babies who were exposed to secondhand smoke and experienced a lot of the problems related to secondhand smoke exposure. This graph, which I really love, shows you what public health can do. And the reason I like this graph is because it's a very nice depiction of all the public health initiatives that were put into place over the years in terms of tobacco use. And you can see how, as the initiatives were put into place, like ad bans, and the non-smokers' rights movement, the master settlement agreement, you can see how the increase in cigarette smoking has declined as these public health initiatives were put into place. And I think this is an important lesson to keep in mind, because public health can have a significant effect on changing behavior, and this is a prime example of how that can be achieved. However, it hasn't solved all the problems. And I want to highlight for you, this is a figure that depicts the top US children's health concerns. And I showed this figure yesterday as well. And you can see here some of the primary things listed that we are concerned about when it comes to our children's health. This ranges from childhood obesity, which I know some of you in the audience are interested in and are working on, bullying, internet safety, and some of the other things we would have predicted which would be on this list. But it also includes smoking and tobacco use, which is the fourth largest problem, and substance use behaviors or drug abuse, which is the third largest problem. Now, I presented a webinar yesterday talking about the substance use issue. I'm not going to be presenting any of that data here other than a small portion of it, but if anybody is interested in discussing that, I would be more than happy to answer questions about that as well. The public health initiatives we have put into place over the years that I showed you on the second slide have had an influence on teen smoking as well. And this slide, whoops, sorry. I hit the wrong button. This slide shows you how teen smoking rates have also declined over a period of time, and this has been related to the interventions, the public health interventions we have put into place. And let me say one thing. There is no evidence that the rise of e-cigarettes has led to this decline in tobacco use. And I think this is a very important thing to keep in mind. There are a lot of people out there who say teen smoking is going down as e-cigarettes use is going up. There is absolutely no evidence that has been presented to indicate that these two things are linked. These decrease in teen smoking rates is related to the strong public health interventional programs we have put into place over the years, and we have to give them credit for what they have done. However, the problem, as you've all probably guessed, is there's a changing landscape of youth substance use behaviors. Just as cigarette use is going down, marijuana use is not, and I'm not going to discuss that in this talk, but like I said, I'm happy to discuss it later if you have questions related to the webinar. But e-cigarette rates are going up significantly, and this graph shows you how from 2011 to 2014 there has been a significant rise in e-cigarette use rates amongst our youth, and this continues to rise. This is data from the Monitoring the Future survey, which is a survey that NIDA does on an annual basis and obtains information from youth. And this slide is national data, which clearly indicates that teens are more likely to use, today, teens are more likely to use e-cigarettes than cigarettes. And very few teens actually think of these products as being harmful. And the rates of use of this product seem to increase from 8th grade to 12th grade, as this graph shows you. Now, this is not just a problem in our country, and these are just some examples of some papers I was able to find from other countries where also e-cigarette use rate is going up significantly. This is the first paper is from Poland, where they saw a significant rise in e-cigarette use rates between 2011 and 2013. And the second paper, for those interested, is 14 to 15-year-olds in New Zealand. Here, the rate of ever use of e-cigarettes or trying an e-cigarette tripled between 2012 and 2014. So these products, as you probably all see, are freely available in your local stores, grocery stores, pharmacies, and they can be purchased relatively easily, and teens are using them. This slide shows you the exponential growth in the sales of this product. It has grown phenomenally. I don't know what other word to use but exponential, although I have been criticized for using that word, but if anybody can give me another option, I would be willing to use that. But there has been a huge increase in the sales of this product, and this is the projection for 2017. It's a small industry that has grown phenomenally. And as you can imagine, and you probably heard, this has produced a huge public health divide. There are those who believe this product is going to be very beneficial, and it very well might be, for the adult smoker who wants to quit smoking. This may be a cleaner form of nicotine to use. All these studies are still ongoing, and I don't think we have the final results yet, but there are a lot of smokers who will say that they've used e-cigarettes and it has helped them quit smoking. However, the fact is these products are freely available in the market, and it's leading to huge increases in use behaviors amongst youth, and that's what my talk is going to focus on. This slide, which is courtesy, I got this from John Samet from USC. I think it's a very nice slide that actually depicts both the benefits and the harm of this particular project, and I always thank John for giving me this. Essentially, when you look at a product in the public health, from a public health view, and you have to do a risk assessment of this product to see whether it has a benefit or whether it produces harm to the population. The benefits of this particular product, which is e-cigarettes, is that it could reduce disease risk, which I just mentioned, for current smokers who either switch to using this product or reduce or quit cigarettes. It could reduce disease morbidity for smokers who have heart and lung disease, who switch to this product or reduce their use of cigarettes. However, you can see that the harm column is actually even larger because we know little about this product at this point. The concern with youth is listed here, and I'll cover it in my next slide. And there are also concerns with adults. There is concern that amongst adults, the presence of this product may lead to maintenance of smoking behaviors or slowing of cessation. So an example of this would be, are people using e-cigarettes in places where they cannot use cigarettes, such as internal locations where they are not allowed to smoke? Perhaps they are used to using e-cigarettes, or perhaps a smoker, perhaps, this is all perhaps a smoker who has said, I want to quit smoking will now, because I can't use my cigarettes everywhere, will now say, maybe I can continue smoking because I can use my e-cigarette in places where I can't use a cigarette. These are all scenarios that need to be examined to establish the risk versus benefit of this product. there is a concern that it may lead to reinitiation of nicotine use in people who have quit. There are a lot of people who have quit smoking, and will this product be a temptation for them? And will this lead to increased disease versus complete cessation? So we always advise all our smokers that quitting is the ultimate goal. You have to move towards quitting. Maintenance behaviors are not something that you should necessarily aim for, but that message does that need to be modified with the presence of these products on the market? And of course, the whole secondhand aerosol exposure, which we need to get a lot more evidence on. So let me now move and talk about the youth concerns. What are we concerned about with regards to e-cigarettes use amongst youth? First, of course, we are very concerned that we have done all this work to remove the normalization of tobacco use behaviors amongst youth using all these public health efforts that I spoke about earlier. The concern is, will youth now think it's normal to use tobacco? And will it then lead to a renormalization of tobacco use behaviors amongst the youth in our country and elsewhere? Will it lead to initiation of nicotine addiction? So will this product be a starter product where kids get addicted to nicotine? Because remember, the addictive substance in tobacco is nicotine, and e-cigarettes contain nicotine. So will kids start using this product, get addicted to nicotine, and then move on to using other conventional tobacco products? Will it lead to maintenance of tobacco use behaviors, not just initiation and progression, but will it actually lead in the long term to maintenance of tobacco use behaviors and all the diseases that come with that? And then, of course, there is this whole unknown factor with e-cigarettes. We know very little about the acute and chronic exposure risks of all the constituents that are in e-liquids, including the flavors, the propylene glycol, the vegetable glycerin, everything else you've heard about, the flavor chemicals. We need evidence to support whether they are safe or whether they are risky, and that is the evidence that a lot of our TCORS are working on gathering. So I think the reason these use behaviors that I'm going to describe now and understanding some of this is important is because if we understand these behaviors, we can develop appropriate regulatory and prevention strategies to prevent our youth from initiating and using the product. Perhaps we can move towards a market where adult smokers, if it is found to be beneficial and help them smoke with quitting smoking, perhaps we can move to a market where these products can be targeted to adult smokers in an attempt to get them to quit smoking, but they are not targeted towards our youth, which is where we are today. So now that I've got off my soapbox, get all that said, let me move into some data to show you some data to support some of the things I'm saying. So in Connecticut, we have been using middle and high school focus groups and surveys since 2013 to try to evaluate some of these issues. This is how, this slide represents how we've done our work. We started out with focus groups where we actually delved and tried to understand these behaviors and how to ask kids questions about these behaviors in 2013. We did this in high school, middle school, and colleges. And then this was then followed by 3 waves of data that were obtained in 2013, 2014, and 2015. And we conduct our surveys. These are anonymous surveys that are conducted in schools. And we choose the schools from different district reference groups. In Connecticut, district reference groups are used to define different areas of the state by socioeconomic status and race distribution. So we pull our schools from these different district reference groups. But I will be the first one to tell you, as I said yesterday, that this is not what I would call a random sample of schools. This is still a convenient sample because we reach out to the schools within the district reference groups and ask them if they would participate, but it's up to the school if they want to participate or not. So in my view, this still falls within the purview of a convenient sample, but I know there are people who are doing a lot better than this, and I think some of their data matches what we find, so hopefully it does fit, what I'll show you does fit what everybody else is finding as well. So I'm going to walk you through a series of slides, and I've labeled it. I'm going to start out with telling you what the next set of slides are going to show. And I've labeled it as evidence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not because of priority issues, just because that's the way I'm presenting my data. It's not that one area is more important than the other, but I just thought it would be a nice way for you to know now I'm going to talk about a different thing. So the first set of evidence I'm going to show you is that, at least in Connecticut, in our data, 1 in 4 youth are using e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes are the first tobacco product that are being used by younger youth, especially those in middle schools. Many high school and middle school students indicate that they plan to try e-cigarette in the future. And many adolescent e-cigarette users are not smokers. So this is kind of a summary of the data I'm going to show you in the next few slides. This is our data from that we obtained in June 2014. On the left side, you see rates of ever trying e-cigs, which means have you used an e-cigarette even once in your lifetime. And here on the right, you have past 30-day use of e-cigarettes, which means anybody who's smoking greater than 1 day in the past 30 days falls into the second category. And as you would have predicted, what you can see is that the rates of e-cigarette use are more in past 30-day smokers, which is this green bar in both middle school and in high school. However, I will point out a couple of things which are worrisome here. One, that kids who say they have never smoked a cigarette are also using e-cigarettes. And importantly, these ever cigarette smokers. So as you know, most of our kids try cigarettes. And many of them decide that they don't want to smoke this because they don't like the taste or they don't like the aversion or how it feels in their mouth. And many of these kids, or probably most of them, are probably kids who have tried cigarettes in the past and have decided this is not for them and have stopped using it. And these are the kids who are now using e-cigarettes. Going back to the point earlier about nicotine exposure in people who have quit or people who have decided not to use, which is one of the points I raised on the earlier slide. So I think this is a group that we really need to watch and see how these behaviors are developing. This is the frequency of e-cigarette use, and the reason I have this slide is just to let you know that it's not low. Yes, there are a significant number of kids who say they used 1 to 5 days in the past month, but there are also a lot of kids who say they used greater than 20 days, and you see some of the other descriptions here. So the frequency of use is not just 1 day. They are using on more days in the past 30 days. This is our paper, which now again, I will point out that this is a very small sample, and we are currently looking at this in our subsequent samples, also to see if this trend holds. But this is a small sample of middle school kids who had actually tried e-cigarettes in the past year. And you can see that a significant portion of them say that e-cigarette was the first product that they tried. And also you can see the same thing. This is from data obtained in 2013. So you can see that these rates as e-cigarettes being the first product they tried is lower in high school youth, but that's because this was just coming into the market at that time, and I don't think it had taken on the form that it has now, where in our more recent data, I'm sure even high school youth, many high school youth probably say it's the first product they tried as well, but this is just older data. This slide shows you intentions to use e-cigarettes in the future, and for this we used a scale called the Pierce Susceptibility Scale, or intentions to use. It actually asks youth, do you plan to use in the future? Would you use an e-cigarette if your peer offered you one? And questions like that. And as you can see on this slide, the intentions to use, this is the total sample. This is youth who have never smoked a cigarette. These are youth who have tried a cigarette in the past and are not currently smoking, and these are current smokers. And the pattern follows what you would expect, which is that these rates are lowest amongst never smokers, and they are highest amongst current smokers. But overall, if you look at the whole sample, about 30% of middle and high school youth say that they plan to try an e-cigarette in the future. This intention to use e-cigarettes has actually overtaken cigarettes. And this data, we asked about, do you plan to use cigarettes in the future, and do you plan to use e-cigarettes in the future? And this data shows you that e-cigarettes are far outweighing cigarettes in what the children plan to do in the future. And as I mentioned earlier, amongst non-smoking youth, there has been a huge uptake in e-cigarette use behaviors. And this pie chart shows you our 2014 data, and you can see that amongst the kids who say they have used e-cigarettes, about 25% of them are smokers, and a majority of the others are non-smokers, so they've never tried a cigarette before. So, my next set of evidence is now going to focus on the question which is on everybody's mind, which is, are these youth using e-cigarettes with nicotine in them? So is there a potential for nicotine addiction amongst this group of kids who are using e-cigarettes? Because I'm sure you've all heard stories about how kids say, I use e-cigarettes, but I don't use nicotine in it. I just use it for the flavors. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that we know the safety of even just using flavors alone as yet. However, the question that we wanted to ask, I'll get to the flavors part in my next set of slides, but the question we wanted to ask here is, are they using nicotine? And this slide shows you the nicotine concentrations that were used by youth in e-cigarettes. These are kids who said that they had used e-cigarettes in the past 30 days, and we asked them, what concentration of nicotine did you use? A significant portion of them say they did not use any nicotine, which is good. And there is a nice distribution of use of all the other concentrations ranging from 6 milligrams to 30 milligram e-liquids that they have used. Now, the one thing I want to point out is this group, which again worries me, because this is the group that says, I don't know. Majority of youth do not purchase their e-cigarettes. Of course, now they're able to purchase it online because it is so easy. All you have to do is attest to the fact that you are over 18. And all that requires is say yes or no to the question, are you over 18? And then it takes you right into the site and you can purchase whatever you want. However, usually most youth get it from their peers, get it from their parents. Now, the reason this worries me is because you don't know what these kids are using. So if they say, I don't know what I'm using, it's very possible that they have been exposed to all kinds of doses of nicotine, and we just don't know what they are using. So I think this is, again, of concern and something that one has to keep in mind. The predictors of nicotine use in this particular data, nicotine-free liquids tended to be used more by non-smokers and those who used e-cigarettes less frequently. However, people who did not know what their nicotine concentration was were more likely to be females and less likely to have purchased their e-liquids. Nicotine users in this sample were more likely to be males, cigarette smokers, and purchase e-liquids from a tobacco shop. So this is telling you that those who go out and purchase their e-cigarettes probably are more likely to know what their e-cigarette contains because they are looking for a particular mix in their e-liquid. However, for most youth who are just getting it from other people, as I'll show you data in a second, are not really, they don't know what their nicotine concentration is. And just to remind you all, why are we concerned about this? And I'm going to take a little bit of a move into a little biology. The reason we are concerned about this is because the adolescent brain is still developing. I'm sure you've all heard this, that doesn't complete development till you're almost 25 years of age. Now, we know that the areas of the brain that make you very sensitive to rewards like nicotine develop very early in an adolescence. So this is data that actually looks at response to rewards, monetary rewards. And essentially what they show is that the adolescent brain is super sensitive to rewards when you compare them to children or you compare them to adults. And this goes for nicotine also. Now, the other thing that's going on in the adolescent brain is you actually have development of areas of, like the prefrontal cortex, that provide cognitive control and enhanced self-control and self-awareness. That's a slower process. That's what's not done till you're almost 25, for those who have heard that. And there is a lot of data that shows that nicotine actually interferes with the maturation of the prefrontal cortex. This is data based on preclinical models, mouse models. There is a huge amount of data in the literature that supports that this actually happens. Now, this is, I just like to, if any of you are interested, I think this paper by Frances Leslie and her colleagues presents a very nice picture of nicotine effects in adolescents versus adults. And what this clearly shows you is that in most cases, adolescents are more sensitive to all the effects of nicotine when you compare them to adults. Again, this is using animal models, not using human data, but this clearly shows that the adolescents are more sensitive to the rewarding effects of nicotine. They do not have as many withdrawal symptoms as adults do. They have lower aversion to higher doses later in life. It's relatively well tolerated. And most importantly, those adolescents mice or rats that are exposed to nicotine actually develop other substance use behaviors much more easily. So just to drive home the point that we need to be concerned about nicotine exposure amongst our youth, especially those who have no exposure to nicotine before. Now, my next set of slides is going to focus on flavors. One of the points I want to drive home is flavors are one of the main reasons why youth are using e-cigarettes. And I know there is a lot of work ongoing in your TCORS, which is also focusing on this issue. And I think this is an issue that's very important, and we need more evidence on flavors. I'm going to get to the rest of the slide later, but this is a slide from one of our published papers that looked at reasons for e-cigarette initiation amongst youth, high school and middle school youth. And I just want to, at this point out this piece, which is good flavors are one of the predominant reasons why many youth say that they are starting to use e-cigarettes. I'll talk about the rest of the factors later, so don't focus on that. But youth use all kinds of flavors. For those of you who don't know, e-cigarette liquids or e-liquids are available in over 7,000 flavors. You can get whatever you want. You can get, apple pie and pina colada and all these amazing sounding things that are very attractive and appealing to most people. And this figure shows you what youth like to use. And predominantly, at least our youth in Connecticut seem to love the fruit flavors. The fruit flavors are very popular, followed by the candy flavors and everything else. But most e-cigarette users don't even like the tobacco flavors that come in the e-liquids because they say it doesn't taste like tobacco. That it doesn't kind of give them that same effect that tobacco and cigarette does. But this just shows you the plethora of different kinds of flavors that you can get, and they are highly appealing to youth. We had asked high school youth, would you try an e-cigarette if it only came in tobacco flavor? And a lot of our kids, especially the never cigarette users, said they would probably never try an e-cigarette if it did not come in so many flavors. So flavors are obviously a very important issue why youth are using e-cigarettes. I want to again take you in a little different direction, because what we have been doing over the past 2 years is, in addition to our surveys, we've also been using laboratory models, experimental studies with human subjects to try to look at the addictive potential of some of these cigarettes. And I'm going to some of these flavors in e-cigarettes. And I'm just going to show you a little snippet of some data that we just got from a completed study. This is a laboratory model where we used a fixed e-cigarette dose administration followed by allowing people to just self-administer how much they wanted. This was done with youth who were 16 to 20 years of age. And we had 60 participants, male and female. And essentially what we did is we gave them the same nicotine dose in each lab session, but we gave them a different dose of menthol. So we really wanted to see, we started out with menthol because we wanted to first examine this question with menthol when we designed the study. We wanted to see, does the dose of menthol interact with how much the youth like nicotine in e-cigarettes? So they either got a 0, 6, or 12 milligram of nicotine, and then they did 3 lab sessions during which they got 0, 0.5, and 3.5% of menthol. And I can tell you a little bit more if you're interested on how we decided on these menthol doses. And I'm just going to show you one slide on this. This is, and I apologize, it's not as fancy as my other slides, but I literally just got this data. So this is looking at 2 issues in the lab, which is how much they like the cigarette, the e-cigarette, and how much they the taste is good. Do they like the taste? And do they like the whole sensation, or how good do they feel after they've been exposed to this particular e-liquid? And what you can see here clearly is that especially at the high dose of nicotine, which is the 12 milligram dose, you are seeing a significant effect of menthol, where the kids are saying that I like this 12 milligram dose more if it has more menthol in it, and the 12 milligram dose tastes better for me if it has menthol in it than when it doesn't have menthol in it. So this again is experimental evidence that's showing you that flavors are doing something. So it's not just a perception that this product is appealing and what they call characterizing flavors, that this product is characterized by what flavor is in it. There's actually the effects of the product seem to depend on the presence of flavors. So I hope I've convinced you that flavors do something, but I think we also need to know a lot more about the safety of flavors. And this is not work that we have done, but a variety of other people in other TCORS have shown that many flavors contain chemicals in toxic levels. For example, they actually took off a flavor called atomic cinnamide from the market because it contained very high levels of cinnamaldehyde. And they also took off a lot of flavors that contain buttery flavors, which contained a compound called diacetyl, which has been shown to be associated with a condition called popcorn lung. For those of you who don't know, this is a very interesting story. They discovered that people who were working in popcorn making factories that were exposed to a lot of these buttery flavor smells developed this condition called popcorn lung, and it was related to the presence of this particular compound in the butter or the buttery flavors that were used to coat the popcorn. That same compound is now was present in a lot of e-liquids, and now that has been removed also. So as you can see, science is very important. We need to study these to see what's in them. Are they toxic? Are they safe? Many of these flavor chemicals are considered GRAS. You must have heard this term. They are generally recognized as safe. However, that term was developed for environmental exposure and not for edible use in products. It cannot be applied to the way that e-cigarettes are used, which is constant, continuous inhalation on a day-to-day basis. So I think we need to be very careful about, we need to know so much more. I think we have only touched our knowledge of this issue. Okay, the next set of data I'm going to show you is that most adolescents get their cigarettes. I've already kind of mentioned this, so I'm going to show you some data now. Most of them get their cigarettes from their friends and have no trouble purchasing them from local tobacco shops or online. And this is a slide that shows you the source of e-cigarette procurement. And you can see here a significant percentage of kids say they got it from their friends, boyfriends, girlfriends. Hence, going back to the nicotine slide I was showing you earlier, they don't really know what they are using. Somebody tells them, hey, you want to share this with me? And they use it. And that's how most of these behaviors start. So we don't really know what they are using in it. And they also get it from a variety of other locations. This data, I believe, was obtained in 2013 or 2014, I forget. But you see the online presence is a little low. The online presence has gone up significantly. A lot of people now are saying they purchase their products from online sources. Here we asked them, have you ever tried to purchase an e-cigarette? And majority of the kids say, I've never tried to purchase an e-cigarette, indicating perhaps that they were using products. These are, by the way, people who have used e-cigarettes or say they have tried e-cigarettes in their lifetime. So this suggests perhaps that they have used somebody else's product. However, there is also a percentage of kids who say that they've tried to buy it from an online store or a physical store or both online and physical locations. And then we asked them, were you ever refused sale from a physical or online store? And only a small percentage of kids, 23.1, said, yes, I was refused sale from a physical store, and an even smaller percentage said, I was refused sale from an online store. So kids are finding it, if they want to purchase the product, they are not having too much difficulty in terms of purchasing the product. In fact, My group tells me a very funny story. They interact with the kids more than I do, unfortunately, nowadays. But they tell me the story how the kids in one particular school are able to tell them exactly when there is a shift change in the local 7-Eleven store that's near their school. When they know the person coming in the afternoon does not apply the rules as much, and they know exactly when they can go to that store and purchase e-cigarettes relatively easily without anybody preventing them from doing it. So remember, these are adolescents. Their whole job is to be a risk taker. That's what it is. I mean, that's what they're supposed to do. We have to find ways of making sure they are not allowed to take these risks, and of course, still not suppress creativity, but that's another whole story. But anyway, so to go back to this, so majority of the kids said they found it easy to purchase these products. The next set of evidence I'm going to show you is that our data and the data of a lot of other people is showing that kids are continuing to use e-cigarettes. And we have now tried to do some work linking our reasons for trying e-cigarettes with continued use. And I'd like to start out by reminding you, there are multiple papers. This is just a snapshot of some of the papers in the literature. There are multiple papers now that are showing that e-cigarette use leads to cigarette use amongst youth, and there's usually continuation of these use behaviors. What we wanted to do in this particular set of data is look to see whether all these reasons we had identified for initiating use. So we had asked kids, why did you initiate use if you used e-cigarettes? And these were all the reasons they identified, and I talked a little bit about the good flavors earlier. Curiosity was a big one, because friends use it, because it's healthier than e-cigarettes. These are all the different reasons that kids gave us for why they started using an e-cigarette. We wanted to see, does this relate to use going forward? So do any of these reasons predict whether youth will continue to use the product, or whether they will just, are any of them not that important to focus on? And when we examined each of the reasons independently, we found that some of these factors were related to continued use of cigarettes. We've kind of broken them up into desirable attributes of the cigarettes, like good flavors, doesn't smell bad, you can hide it from an adult, and low cost. Social norms, like friends use it and you can use it anywhere. That's another reason why they continue to. These are the kids. So these are the factors which predicted continued use in our regression models. And this last one is more goal-directed reasons, which is to quit smoking and the fact that they are healthier than cigarettes. This figure kind of puts it all together for you. And you can see here that there are two factors which really came out as being significant. One was low cost. Again, note the small sample sizes. So we need a lot more work in this area, folks. I mean, we are just kind of we're just starting some of these investigations. And I always tell people you have to keep the small sample sizes in mind when you're looking at this. We just don't have enough data on all this as yet. However, in this paper, what we showed is that low cost and quitting smoking were two of the top reasons why kids continue to use, top reasons, but many other reasons also played a role that kids continue to use. But this was a very small sample, even when you think about kids who are trying to quit smoking. And in fact, amongst those, these are some of the reasons. This graph shows you the reasons were classified by the different categories I just showed you, the desirable attributes, social norms, goal-directed behaviors. And these are the reasons that actually predicted continued use amongst the sample that we examined. As far as cigarette smoking, quitting smoking is concerned, unfortunately, 80% of the kids who said they used e-cigarettes to quit smoking at wave 1 were still smoking at wave 2. So it doesn't seem to have helped them quit. So I just want to make this point to just state that we still don't know if this product helps with quitting smoking. So that's the, since our odds ratio was so huge in terms of, continued use for quitting smoking, I thought this was an important point to make in this talk as well. So last set of evidence, at least in this series of slides I'm going to show you, is that some smoking youth or kids who smoke cigarettes are using e-cigarettes to quit smoking, but they do not seem to be successful, kind of following on the data that I just showed you, where 80% of the kids were still smoking. This is data evidence from fall 2013 where we asked kids, did you use e-cigarettes to quit smoking? And these were kids who were both e-cigarette and cigarette users, a sample of about 675. Only 20% of them said that they had initiated e-cigarettes to quit smoking. And this shows you in terms of how much their e-cigarette frequency was. So depending on how much they had used in the past month, no past month use, 1 to 5 days of use, 6 to 28 days of use, and daily use of cigarettes, how that was related to use of e-cigarettes to quit smoking. The slide shows you that 41.7% of kids who were daily users said they used e-cigarettes to quit smoking. However, we did not find that this use of e-cigarettes for quitting smoking was associated with current or former cigarette smoking status. So what does that tell you? That most of these kids had not quit. That even though they were saying they were using e-cigarettes to quit, they had not quit smoking. And I think that's an important issue to keep in mind. The one caveat I have for this, and I think this is where we absolutely need more data, what I've shown you is just cross-sectional data. We need more longitudinal, long-term studies to see what's happening with these use behaviors. Are kids using it to quit smoking? Are they successful at some point of time? We need that data, and if it is, then that's great. But we just don't have that data as yet to tell us whether these products are helpful or not. So, at the end of this section, I have a few more slides for you. I'm not sure how much time I have, but nobody has raised the sign yet, so I'm assuming I still have time. I hope I have convinced you so far that, at least based on our data, there are certain things you can do, that you can think of doing to prevent youth from using e-cigarettes. Controlling flavors is one thing that should be done, because these seem to be the reason why most youth are using e-cigarettes. Cost seems to be another factor that is coming out, but the cost of these products are very variable, and they were very expensive initially, then they got very cheap, and now they're very expensive again. It really depends on whether you're using the product as it comes in a package or whether you're modifying the product. So this is a very difficult thing to define, but it's something to keep in mind. We definitely need to do something about this easy access piece, which is, if we have local laws that are put into place that say you cannot sell e-cigarettes to a minor, we better find ways of making sure that those laws are, put into place and people support them and make sure minors cannot purchase this product. So I think it's an important issue. And the ability to use the product anywhere is another question that's important to address. Now, in my last few set of slides, I want to show you an additional reason why if I'm still concerned about the use of these products, and that is because youth are using these products for all kinds of other behaviors, which can increase the appeal and toxicity of these products. And I think this is very important to keep in mind. So they are not just using this for nicotine administration. They are using it for flavors, as you've heard about before. They may use it without nicotine with just flavors in them. They're using it for smoke tricks. If you go to YouTube and look on YouTube, or if you've seen any youth out there, you can do all kinds of cool things with these e-liquids. You can blow, you can vapor, whatever you call it, smoke rings, mustaches, dragons, smoke domes, something called a French inhale, which is very interesting. But if you look at the YouTube video, you can see them doing these smoke tricks. These are very appealing to youth. And all these, we have somebody examining this in our TCORS, but it appears that most of this material is freely available to youth. So they get influenced by these. And when we asked the kids what is cool about e-cigarettes, along with flavors, smoke tricks was one of the big reasons why kids started using e-cigarettes. Another thing that e-cigarettes are being used for today is vaporizing marijuana, vaporizing cannabis. Very popular, even with the youth. And this is our sample. You can see that amongst those who are lifetime e-cigarette users, close to 20%, and even higher amongst those who said they had used both e-cigarettes and cannabis in their lifetime. So this sample was those who had never used cannabis. This is those who used both cannabis and e-cigarettes. And they vaporize all kinds of different things in the e-cigarette, including hash oil and THC wax, which are the two things that you can see here. And these products can be freely purchased and kids have access to these products. And we have a paper published on this issue too. And it's not just us who have, ours is not the only data on this issue. Monitoring the Future actually put out some statistics from their 2014 data, which showed, these numbers are much lower than ours, but they showed that kids are using e-cigarettes for vaporizing marijuana or hash oil. So this is another thing that we really need to keep our eyes on, and because we don't know the toxicity of these kinds of uses. We know, as it is, we know very little about these products, so now they're starting to put hash oil and THC wax in it. We don't know what they're going to be exposed to. And the last thing, which is, again, very concerning to us, is this issue of direct dripping. Direct dripping, for those of you who don't know what it is, it involves dripping your e-liquid directly onto a heated atomizer and inhaling the vapors. A lot of kids who do smoke tricks use this because it just gives them a bigger amount that they can inhale. So, but as you can imagine, this involves exposure to high temperatures because your atomizer is very hot. And there are a few papers in the literature that actually show that direct dripping increases the amounts of toxicants that you're exposed to from the e-liquid. So, and this is the rates of dripping amongst lifetime e-cigarette users. About 26.1% of kids say that they drip. I'll also say 25% of kids say they don't know. So I was discussing this with Melissa yesterday. You know, we don't know how to ask some of these questions. This is the other concern, because these are emerging behaviors. You know, a kid may not know what dripping is, but they may call it something else. And we need to find out how to ask these questions of youth so we get the appropriate data. And they say that these are some of the reasons for dripping, that it produced thicker clouds of vapor, the flavor tasted better, that it produced a stronger throat hit, and some other reasons. So these are behaviors I think we are still very concerned about. And I feel that the public health debate on e-cigarettes has to consider the prevalence and toxicity of these other e-cigarette use behaviors also when we are considering the risks versus benefits of this product, and that we have to balance the potential benefits, as I just mentioned to you, we still don't know if it is beneficial or not, the potential benefits of these products to adult smokers against the potential harm of these products on youth. And so I hope I have conveyed some of my concerns about youth use of e-cigarettes to you. And I could never end a talk without thanking the village that it takes to get all this work done. I'm sure you all would agree with me also, but I'm just the mouthpiece that presents these results. That I have a phenomenal group of people working with me who make all this happen, and I'm very thankful to all of them. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. That was a great talk. You know, I think it'll set a standard for understanding the issues related to youth and adolescents and e-cigarettes. So now we have about a half hour for those of you who can stay for a question-answer period. I want to thank our speaker again, and if you can move in a little bit closer, because we have some microphone issues. I'm going to lead off with the first question, if you don't mind. I am on my child's school health advisory council. And today at 4:30 we have a meeting. What should I tell them to do about e-cigarettes?
Tell them to have laws in the school that says kids cannot use e-cigarettes in the school. Because many schools are not aware, or maybe they don't know, they wait for the state legislature to come down with rules about what to do and not do in schools. And while the state legislature is working out these kinds of issues, the use of e-cigarettes in schools many kids say they use e-cigarettes in schools. Their teachers use it, they use it, and I think schools can actually lay down rules about what can happen on their school premises. And they need to have laws in place that says you cannot use e-cigarettes in schools, just like you can't use cigarettes in schools.
Very good. Those of you know that in Texas we did that in 2013, where the state has banned the use of e-cigarettes on school property. So the state of Texas has done that. School districts, it always takes a few years to get it rolling along. Anyway, questions? Who has a Frank Bandiera from Dallas. Yeah, let me repeat the question for our online audience. So the question is whether or not what the data says about the addictive potential of nicotine in e-cigarettes, and secondarily, how does one measure that?
So that's a good question, and we are just developing the models. So the e-cigarette laboratory model I showed you, one of the purposes of that is to look at the addictive potential of the product, to see how flavors are influencing how addictive it is. As far as measures for dependence, that's also a work in progress. There is a work group that is working on measures that can be used to assess use, risk perception, as well as dependence amongst both youth and adult e-cigarette users. However, it takes a little while to collect the sample and create these measures, and I think everybody is concerned about doing it right. So that's also a work in progress, so maybe give us a couple of years.
Okay, other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I wonder if you could share a little bit of your insight as far as being on the scientific advisory board as to the FDA's decision not to include flavors in the regulatory issue at this time.
Yeah, so the question is whether or not flavors should or should not, I suppose, be involved in the FDA regulations, and sort of what happened with that.
Your guess is as good as mine. Unfortunately, on this issue, I think flavors should have been a part of the deeming rule that came out. There is a version of the deeming rule that was actually released by the FDA, which contained components of the rule which were redacted before the final rule was released. The redacted portion had language about flavors. We are not really sure why OMB, which has the final authority in terms of releasing this rule, why they redacted that language and why flavors were removed. So I can't answer that question. I wish they hadn't, because flavors are a huge part of the appeal of the product.
Yes.
Can I just add to that? My understanding is that the evidence about the role that flavors have in the cessation of cigarette smoking behaviors among adults, that perhaps drove that particular decision.
I think what Melissa said, that this decision to redact it may have been based on the evidence that suggested that flavors might help adult smokers quit smoking. However, I think, Melissa, what I would say to that is there is very limited evidence supporting that. This has become a very emotional debate, and there are a lot of e-cigarette users who obviously say that e-cigarettes have helped them quit smoking, and they are strongly in support of flavors. But I think we have very little scientific evidence to support that that is true.
I think
Joe.
it has a lot more to do with the guy who used to be deputy director of OMB, who now lobbies for the tobacco industry.
Joel Dunningham bringing up a nefarious comment once again.
Please note that it came from him and not me.
Thank you, Joel. We count on that. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know enough about this, but what would you say from your research about, you mentioned that cost was a big driver in addressing consumption of e-cigs. What about taxes on e-cigs? And are you aware of states that have been effective in doing that? Well, what's your knowledge of that?
Yeah, the question is about the effect of taxation on e-cigarette use. Has it been applied anywhere? And what's the potential for it in, I guess, alongside the way it works for cigarettes?
So this comes down to the same emotional debate I was just referring to. Taxation is a strategy that has been shown very, very nicely to reduce cigarette use behaviors. However, people are hesitant to go down the taxation path because there is a significant concern that if this product indeed helps adult smokers quit smoking, if it is beneficial, and again, I'm prefacing all this with an if, If it works out, it does help adult smokers quit smoking, then by taxing the product, you would actually be preventing them from going down the cessation path, which is they may choose not to take e-cigarettes if an e-cigarette is more expensive than a cigarette. This would alter their decision to make that decision. However, as I said, that's the efficacy really needs to be established before we can go down that path. But that's one of the reasons why taxation strategies have not been implemented, at least to my understanding.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering if there were efforts to kind of remove the veil of what goes into the flavors. I think it's worked somewhat in the food industry. You have all these food scientists who work on mouthfeel, things that make hamburgers at Whataburger or whatever addictive. And I'm sure the same thing's going on with e-cigs. And I'm wondering if we can remove the veil of all those scientists behind getting people hooked, if that might be a strategy, and if that's being kind of initiated now.
Yeah, so the question has to do, I believe, with reporting of the actual ingredients and constituents of what's in the e-cigarette vapor. We do that with nutrition. Why not with tobacco?
Excellent point. I think it needs to happen. And I think that's one of the things that the FDA is moving towards, hopefully in the future, to actually having people. In fact, the deeming rule would require that all e-cigarette manufacturers present a list of their ingredients when their product is available on the market. However, as we know from the rule that just came out, they also have a few years to comply. So it's not something that needs to happen immediately. The one other thing I will say about this issue is that we are also finding a huge variability in terms of the content of these e-liquids. So some work that has been done by our TCORS found levels of alcohol in some of these e-liquids that did not need to be there. So I believe it is part of the manufacturing process. Like in order to get some, if you think back to your basic chemistry, in order to get some of these flavor chemicals into solution, you have to use a certain level of alcohol or maybe other ingredients, balance out the profile of the constituents. Again, this is a safety issue that we need to figure out how this is being done and what goes into it. Yeah.
Dale, you have a question.
Great presentation. Something I'm really interested in is your take on how we best balance out the use of randomized controlled trials and population or cohort studies for effectively determining if these things are cessation devices. Because when you do a randomized controlled trial, you usually limit the types of devices available and the types of users. While in a cohort study, you might get people who are buying the $5 ones at 7-Eleven and the $200 ones online and drastically different products. So what's your take on how we should kind of incorporate all of that data and approach, methods, and everything to actually answer that question, use these things to help people quit smoking?
I'll paraphrase Dale's question, say, does God exist? It's a pretty hard question there, Dale. How best to conduct randomized controlled trials, given a bunch of considerations?
Right. I don't have a good, a really super answer to your question. I think the problem we had is that we are not able to conduct, well, it's difficult. I shouldn't say we are not able to. It's difficult to conduct a traditional randomized controlled trial with these products. And the reason being that you have to get something called an ITP from the FDA in order to be able to use these products. It's like an IND, for those of you who have worked with drugs. You have to get an application like that from the FDA in order to be able to conduct these studies. Now, the reason this has been problematic also is there has been no consistency in the availability of these products or their contents over a period of time. So I know some colleagues who have started work with one particular product and then found it's off the market or it's completely changed within 6 months. And ITP is not cannot allow things like that to happen. It doesn't take that into consideration. So it's a very difficult thing to do. That said, I do know that NIDA has had an announcement that they are creating a experimental e-cigarette and experimental e-liquids. And that's going to be available to researchers to actually do work with these products, hopefully in the near future. But that still doesn't answer your question of how likable are these products going to be. We still have to address this issue of, are the users going to like this product as much as the $200 product that they regularly use? And I think this is, it's going to be one of the problems we're going to have to figure out over the next few years. So I have no advice other than saying this, that I think we have to do these studies with the product that the users use. I mean, really, what is the point of doing a study with something that nobody uses? It can help us understand something about the product and its effects, but there's always somebody who could argue that some product which is different from the product that's being tested is better.
Okay, there's a question in the back row.
Thank you so much for coming today. So I have a question, perhaps it came up in the interviews, about social consequences of use, being caught by an authority figure, or perhaps some acute health issues like developing a cough from regular use, if any of those consequences came up.
The question is about consequences of use and social consequences.
Right. So social consequences of use is not something that we have found is a huge issue yet. Even though most schools say e-cigarette use is not allowed in the school, kids still use them. And I don't think anybody, you have to remember, principals of schools and administrators are faced with so many issues. This is probably like the bottom of the pack. This is not something that they want to take on and handle in any big way. I can't say I blame them, because they do have so many other issues to deal with, but I think they do need to put some processes into place for preventing this from happening. As far as social consequences of smoking or vaping at home, most youth vape at home. Most youth tell us that they started vaping because their parent bought them an e-cigarette, thinking that this product is safer than cigarettes, so we'd rather you use an e-cigarette. So I think we can do a lot from an education perspective, education directed at parents. I was in a session 2 days ago trying to learn how to write op-ed pieces, which another whole thing. But there were physicians in the room who told me they did not know that the e-cigarettes that were present in Walgreens on the shelves were not regulated by FDA, that they did not know that the effects of these products were not established. If physicians are saying that, what can the common parent know about these products? So I think we need to do more to educate even the parents of the youth about what is not known about this product. Just tell them that we know very little about these products, and you should not be telling your kid it's okay to use them.
Yeah, I agree. Continuing education is very definitely needed.
Yeah.
Megan.
Hi, I worked with Dr. Felder to pilot a youth e-cigarette prevention program targeted for middle school students, the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And our Felder developed 6 sessions that are roughly 30 minutes long. And now what we're looking at is expanding that to include more program components. And one of the things we were looking at was we're developing parent resources, signage for the school. So can you speak a little bit more to some suggestions for us as to what those parent resources would look like, or what that signage would look like within the schools, giving your suggestion of education and increasing awareness?
Right.
So the question is, there's a group here, including myself, who's working on an e-cigarette prevention program at schools, which includes curriculum. Do you have advice on other elements which would include parents and on the educational strategies?
Okay. Yes. My simple advice to you is short and sweet. Because if there is, you have to find a way of communicating this to parents. And I say this with I'm the vice chair of the IRB at Yale, so I speak from the idea of sending information to parents about students' participation in research. The simpler and shorter and more informative you can keep your brochure, the better it is. And I think the point to really make to them is to specify the unknown. I think most people are not aware, like I said, that the product is not regulated yet, that there's an unknown factor, that we know very little about what happens with the constant inhalation of propylene glycol and vegetable glycerine over a period of time, that these flavors, we know very little about them. So if you can identify each one of those things and keep it short and sweet, I think parents will get the message.
Very good. Maria.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about your study that looked at youth and their nicotine concentration levels that they use in e-cigarettes. So do you have a sense, and maybe you've looked at this in some of your qualitative research, do you think youth really know what nicotine is and how, because I found in some, I did some interviews even with young adults, and they would get nicotine and tobacco kind of confused, right? In the terms of So I just wonder among youth, maybe if someone told them, oh, this is just water vapor, then they assume that it's a product that doesn't have nicotine/tobacco. I'm just, kind of curious of your take, if you really get it.
So we have a methodological question about, do kids understand the word nicotine well enough to be able to adequately respond to surveys?
I think the question also was, can they differentiate between nicotine and tobacco?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think so. And I think this is one of the problems I was just mentioning with all our surveys and the questions that we ask. We develop certain questions, we jump into the field and we get the data, and then you scratch your head later and think about it and said, oh, maybe this is not done right. And we absolutely need to understand that. And I think understanding the difference between nicotine and tobacco especially is a very important issue because one of the things that we need to remember is that many smokers, for example, they are used to nicotine replacement versus cigarettes, right? So they are used to talking in terms of nicotine replacement versus cigarettes which contain 4,000 chemicals versus nicotine replacement which just has one chemical. We need to have that same kind of conversation with youth also, and I think we need to understand that. So I don't have an answer to your question. I would be the first to admit that we need more qualitative work probably in terms of every aspect of this that we are examining.
We're talking to the right group. These are our TCORS pre- and postdoc students who are the next generation of
And
researchers.
they're very smart. They've asked me the best questions so far.
That's good. Well, thank you. Thank you. Yes. Katie.
It's very similar, actually, to Maria's question, but I just thought it was interesting taking together the Kong et al. That you presented, sources of e-cigarette procurement, and then the recollection of how much liquid or concentration they used. And I was just wondering, you mentioned qualitative research, but are there other ways that you would suggest to kind of get at this? Are youth really able to recall, or are they just saying zero because they don't recall?
Yeah, the question is how best to ask children the question about nicotine. I mean, well, the first question was about, do they even know the difference between nicotine and tobacco? The second question is, do they know, and how best can we get at what milligram level is in the e-juice that they're smoking?
My best suggestion for you that we are kind of moving towards now is to have them bring their product in.
Yeah.
And to examine what they are using. I think that's the best way. Now, that said, some products still don't have labels. So sometimes you may not know what's in the product really also. But it's a little hard to do because when you're doing a survey in a whole school, you can't tell the kids, bring your product in, we want to look at it, I mean, this would create problems for us with the schools that we probably don't want to deal with. So it's a little hard to do when you're doing survey work, but I really think doing smaller studies with maybe regular users, seeing them in a different setting, having them bring in their product and really determining what's in it is very important to do.
Yeah, I might also recommend taking pictures of their bottle with online-oriented surveys like the one that Dr. Harrell's using.
Yeah.
Joel.
So part of the bothersome thing of your lecture to me is, one, you're speaking about principles, but also your third slide there, the one with the survey of adults of what's important. And obesity is up there number 1, and tobacco, I think it dropped to 7th in the latest one.
Yes, you're right, in the latest one.
Part of my talks I give on censorship of the media. So, because tobacco, if you're looking for what's one to kill them all, it's tobacco by
Yep.
far above
Yep.
all the rest of those.
Yep.
But that hasn't changed since 1989 Surgeon General's report where they did a similar thing, and tobacco was even further down. It was underneath RF radiation from your radio. But principals also. I mean, which one's going to kill most of his kids? It's actually tobacco. And if he's looking at the kids who are doing bad things and depression and suicide, most likely those are the kids who are also using tobacco or e-cigarette
Or nicotine.
or nicotine. You know, I've told principals group before, you know, look for the kids who are smoking, go work on them first, because those are the ones who have the most psych problems,
Yeah.
you know, the suicide problems, and other problems in your school. You know.
Yeah, so the question is, pertaining one of your slides about the level of importance of the different issues in kids, and why is tobacco so far down when clearly, you know, from any scientific perspective, it should be ranked higher.
I couldn't agree with you more. If I had my way, I would rate tobacco all the way at the top, nicotine all the way at the top. I think this is it's an interesting issue, because if you talk to most adults, they would say, my kid doesn't do that. My kid is more affected by bullying in school. This is what I see on a day-to-day basis. My kid doesn't smoke cigarettes. Having a 16-year-old myself, I am getting extremely aware of the fact that there are there are things your kids tell you, and there are things your kids don't tell you, and that you have to be more worried about what they're not telling you than about what they are telling you. I think this is a public information issue, and let's not forget the importance of cigarette smoking and all the problems, and tobacco use and all the problems that it brings, just because we have that graph which shows cigarette smoking rates are going down. We haven't eliminated it completely. We still live in a society where cigarettes are freely available, and I think it should be a top priority and a top concern for us. And we should not back off on this battle just because somebody tells you, why are you concerned about cigarettes anymore? The rates are going down. I should not be concerned about this anymore. I think that's the wrong attitude to take, because the minute you back off on things like this, you're going to get an upsurge again in use behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My colleague Donald and I have been working with the eliminating tobacco use throughout the UT system. One of the things we were discovering is, as far as a social consequence or other consequences, there's a real consequence these folks who make, and then setting off fire alarms, disrupting final exams, and other kinds of things. And so while we're waiting for the FDA to help us with enforcement, there's clear business reasons to prohibit vaping at spaces like schools and campuses.
Take it.
Absolutely, I agree. I think the safety of these products needs to be addressed, especially if kids are doing things like direct dripping, where they're opening up the atomizer and they're exposing themselves to all this heat. You know, these are things that we need to get the word out there, that this is not safe to do. And the thing that, the problem with that is also that not all e-cigarettes burst, right? So not all of them create problems. So you're also dealing with users who say, I have used mine for years and I've never had a problem. This is not unsimilar to what we used to have with cigarettes, just to remind you. Cigarettes caused a lot of fires, but they were caused by people who were using cigarettes in bed, when they were sleeping, when they were not paying attention to how they were using their cigarettes. The majority of cigarette users did not cause fires, but there were cigarette users who caused fires, and it caused a lot of problems. So I think it's a balance between, you know, what to emphasize that's believable. And as you know, in public education programs, you can't put information out there that's not believable, because then nobody's going to believe what you're saying. If you say all e-cigarettes cause fires, then, you know, nobody's going to believe that. So I think it's a question of drawing a balance, and I don't envy you your job of trying to create that balance.
We just have time, or we're about ready to close. I'll ask one last question, because it's my impression that the divide that you started, the public health divide that you started your talk with, could be characterized by, you know, adults versus kids. Mm-hmm. Because adults, smokers, free to do what they want, give information. Maybe these e-cigarettes will work, maybe they won't. The jury's out. There's a lot of people in tobacco control that don't even think about kids very much. So I am concerned about us as researchers and as people that give information to policymakers that we haven't been vigorous enough to tell them the things that you've told them. Has that been your impression? I mean, that's the way I read the UK report that says let's go ahead and do it with everyone. And that's the way I read it from Ken Warner in his op-ed in the New York Times and a few other people who have been very heavy in tobacco control. So can you talk just a little bit about that
Sure.
from your top side or top level perspective?
Honestly, that is the reason why I was in this op-ed writing course last week, because I wanted to learn how to write pieces that could reach out to the public, and I would encourage all of you to do the same. We are the scientists, we have the information on these products, and I think we have not been good enough at getting the word out about the potential harm of nicotine, the potential harm of all these products to youth. If you talk to anybody, almost everybody will agree that youth should not use anything. You know, if you talk to them, they'll say, of course you shouldn't use anything. But when you start getting down to the nitty-gritty of what they know, they have very little information about why to support this idea. As a parent, when you're at home and you are presenting an argument to your teenager, it had better be a darn good one. Because nowadays, they challenge you on everything you tell them. And I, in fact, find I have to have my scientific facts ready when I'm talking to my son more than I do with other audiences. So I think our role as scientists to get the public word out there, to educate parents, to educate the masses, is something we have not been very good at as far as the youth issue is concerned. I don't think the regulatory authorities are that blind. I think they really know a lot of this data, and they have known it for a long time. But we need to do a better job of the other piece.
Fair enough. Thank you for the question and answer. Thank you for a lovely lecture, and turn over to Dr. Perry.
And we probably should give Dr. Kelder a round of applause for his. It's hard to remember and rephrase all those questions. So I just wanted to thank you again for being our speaker this year and for delivering such an excellent lecture, and wanted to give you a little award, which is an actual piece of Texas.
Wonderful.
Since you haven't been to Austin before, you can take some of it home with you.
Wonderful.
I hope it's, it is a little heavy. Anyway, so if you could all join me in a round of applause again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, that's a very neat idea.
And thank the audience for joining us today, and those of you who are watching on live stream. And you will, lucky participants will receive a follow-up survey about this. So it's short and sweet, so please, not sweet like e-cigs, but sweet. You can, yes, please fill it out, and so that'll inform our next lecture. So thank you all for joining us. There is some food and refreshments still available, so please feel free to help yourself. So thank you all.